So I flew in from New York, and then I went to Belgium, and now I'm here, and I'm really excited. The weather is lovely. But before I jump into my talk, I think it's important to introduce myself a little, because I'm new to Europe. So one thing about me is I like to draw quite a bit, but I call myself a hack artist, not a real artist. I'm too scared to say that. So I like to take iconic characters and put afros on them. So this is Wonder Woman, this is Alice in Wonderland, and this is Frida Kahlo. So that's what I like to do in my spare time. So let's jump into my conversation today. So I forgot my clicker, so you might see me do this and running back and forth, so please forgive me. I'm not weird, I just forgot my clicker. So let's jump into our conversation today. Today I'd like to talk to you about one of the projects I've been working on for the past 2 years. In the space of developer engagement, specifically around documentation, and why it's important for us to build great documentation for both first-time coders as well as experienced developers who are building content every single day. So let's jump and talk about documentation. Documentation is how we educate people, sell our product, how we keep our users engaged, and most importantly, how we build trust. Documentation lets your customer know that you are as invested in your product as they are. So you are giving countless hours into building a product based on our technology. We should give countless of hours in creating documentation that makes you successful. So it's important when we build documentation for our experienced and our newbie developers that we give them the quickest on-ramp experience as possible. We want you to be able to go from the document to being successful on your computer as smoothly as possible. So documentation today, for the most part, is good, but it makes way too many assumptions. There's the assumption of knowledge. When writing documentation, especially for developers, and I've made this mistake countless of times, is I assume that you have previous knowledge of the framework or the language being discussed. I have written documentations where I've referenced earlier models of .NET Framework or C#1, which are not relevant to the person coming to the language for the very first time. It also gives a person the assumption on their side that they need to know everything about the ecosystem before they actually write their first language line of code. The next one is the assumption of tech, something I have also been very guilty of doing. When I write documentation, I sometimes write it from the Windows perspective. I'm assuming that the person who's using my documentation is running Windows, Windows 10, and even has the same quality of internet bandwidth that I do. A good example is giving links and references to things that are specific to an operating system that is similar to yours. And the last one is the assumption of time. Whether you are a first-time developer or an experienced developer, you're usually learning new things or catching up on technology in your own time and in your spare time. So we need to assume that we have to create quicker experiences for you as well. So most of the documentation today looks like this. How many of you write blogs? Right? How many of you have static code snippets that look like this? Right? So static code snippets like this often leave your reader wondering what this does, or making assumptions on what this code snippet does. And this leads to the biggest crime that all of us have been guilty of, copying and pasting from everywhere. How many of you are a Stack Overflow developer? I know there are more of you in the room, but it's a safe space. Put up your hand, put up your hand, put up your hand, right? Yes, we've all been guilty of copying and pasting code all over from Stack Overflow. But think about it from two different users. If I am a new timer, like I'm learning to code for the first time, and you give me a snippet of code, I'll be left kind of baffled. I'll think about what templates should I use? Where does this random piece of code go? What libraries do I need? And this just gives them such a huge ramp up to get started. So I'll share a story. Before I was a program manager, I was a developer evangelist. How many of you know what that is? You get people excited about the product, one of those salesy people that we were talking about before, right? And I went to NYU, and I was teaching an intro to programming with C#. So I gave them a GitHub repo, and I had a set of instructions that said, go install Visual Studio, and you'll be good to go, plus all the code that they needed. So this was a class of 100 students. 70% of them couldn't get the code to run, because even though they installed Visual Studio, guess what workload they selected instead of C#? C++. So they all selected the C++ workload, tried to copy and paste the code over, and it didn't work. So at the end of the day, they're like, I'm done with Microsoft, and I'm done with Visual Studio, and nothing works. So I gave them such a horrible on-ramp experience. And then when you think about our experienced developers, you're going into that copying and paste workload of trying to figure out what works, and you probably have like 100 console apps and 200 web apps on your thing, like web app 222, console app 156, because you're trying to figure out all this stuff. And the truth is that the expectations of what documentation is has completely changed. So users are coming to expect their document to be more interactive. I know my boss has appeared several times in code, like Codegarden tweets, so just tweet him one more time and just tell him I'm doing a great job. So my boss is Scott Hanselman, Maria's doing a great job. But video content was a huge improvement in this space. It gave users the opportunity to bond with the person who was teaching them what they were doing. And we've seen success with this. So Udacity is a multi-billion-dollar company because of just creating video content. Udemy, people are becoming millionaires on YouTube from creating online documentation. LinkedIn Learning, Microsoft had MVA, we still have Channel 9, so it's really relevant to create that video content. But the problem with video content, while incredibly good, does require a substantial amount of time. So if I create a 3-minute video, it's 3 minutes for me, but somebody who's watching it at home could be pausing, rewinding, going back, that becomes 12 minutes. If it's a 6 hours worth of content, that becomes multiple days. We're asking you to commit all this time to learn something new. And then when we're exploring the basics, when you want to learn the fundamentals of a brand new programming language, or you want to test an API, people want quick and easy development. They want to understand what a function is without having to install an editor. They want to understand what a variable is. And some of the most popular programming languages like JavaScript and Python have been doing this from the beginning. The ability for first-time developers and people who are coming from other languages to experiment in the browser. And we're not only seeing this with highly popular languages like JavaScript and Python, but we're also seeing this in more complicated industry targeted languages like Go and Scala, where they understand they need to win this market share. So they're actually also giving you these experiences where you don't have to manipulate your developer environment in order to get started. Then we have the learn experience. So you also want the ability to learn a specific scenario. So everyone's probably heard of all these catchphrases like serverless and functions and Docker and container and all the catchwords that are coming up in the tech industry. Should I have to manipulate my environment in order to know and look what it feels like? If you look at this screen, you'll notice that we have documentation on one side, and we have a command line experience on the other side, where users are able to put in commands, they're able to edit the code, giving them a native-like experience. So when they do transition into a native editor, it's a seamless transition for them. And finally, there's the ability to try. So everyone here uses some sort of package on a regular basis, right? NuGet, npm. It's okay, I'm sharing an npm. I don't feel bad if you don't use NuGet and you use npm. I'm cool with that. But npm has provided an amazing experience where you can test npm packages in the browser. The ability to create these experiences enables package owners to sell their product easier. It also allows the developer to see the differences between versions, and you don't have to create a throwaway project or install it into your existing project in order to try something out. And what all these experiences tell us is that then we are narrowing the divide between documentation and code. And we need to, as a tech industry, make sure we're able to provide those experiences for you. It's our responsibility to on-ramp you to that. And we have a growing landscape with a variety of skills. We have the developers I'm assuming a number of people in this room are developers, yeah? Maybe? A little bit? Okay. So we have the developers who want the ability to educate other developers about the tools they're using. We have the hobbyists, which is a huge growing field of makers and people building websites and mobile developers, as well as social media influencers, which is a job now. Like, people are social media influencers who are building their own websites and want to understand more about what they're building to build their business. We have educators, both tech and non-tech educators. So I don't know how you do it over here, but in America, primary and secondary school teachers are being asked to teach people how to program. They're teaching it all in Java. So let me describe their scenario for you. They are given a Word doc with Java code, and then they're given Eclipse. Then they're told to copy and paste the Java code into Eclipse, run the code, copy and paste the output into Word, and distribute the Word doc to their students. Their students then do the same process of copying the code back into Eclipse, running it, and putting in the results, and giving the teacher the Word doc to mark. I know, it's pretty intense, right? Because we're forcing these non-technical teachers to learn a whole IDE, and then they don't know enough to go and teach the students who are going to use it. Also, Eclipse is a pretty heavy IDE. And the last is students, right? So this is students both who are doing a CS degree as well as students who are learning it. So we're all going to begin growing and using code more and more and more. And all these users have different variety and levels that they need to complete in their documentation to be successful. So we've talked about the importance of good documentation and the expectations of good documentation, but what does the data tell us? So we looked at the community pulses. Where are people learning to code? So at Microsoft, we did a bunch of research, and majority of it was internal, but I wanted to share some external surveys. Now, these surveys might be a little bit skewed because the people who answer these results are fans of the platforms that they're using. So Free Code Camp, I don't know if anyone has heard of it. Okay, so Free Code Camp, let me give you a bit of a background, is a very popular platform for first-time developers. It's a mixture of Stack Overflow with a little bit of Slack and Medium posts all in one place. And their whole goal is how can they empower people to be more technically ready and be prepared for the changing job market. The next one is Stack Overflow, which I know every single person in this room uses. And it's all about enthusiastic programmers asking questions. So if you look at the survey results, and that's why I said it was skewed, because Free Code Camp was overwhelmingly the most popular. But let's ignore the first two, and you'll see that Codegarden, Udemy, and Mozilla are the top three of where people go to learn on their own. Now, Codegarden is a mixture of video content plus an interactive editor, which people can do everything in the browser. Udemy is very video-based, short videos with exercises at the end. And Mozilla Developer Docs is probably the best developer documentation out there, I would have to say. Would you agree? I would agree. It's the best developer documentation out there. They put the rest of us to shame. Now, when we look at Stack Overflow, they had two different questions that were quite similar. The first one was, how are people who have technical degrees continuing to learn? And the other one is, how are self-taught people learning? So if you look at the people who came out of a CS program and are working as engineers right now, a lot of them taught themselves without using formal courses, so it was on their own. And if you looked at self-taught people, official documentation or standards of the technology was the most important thing. So when I was beginning to think about interactive documentation and what we were doing, I went and I talked to people who were in boot camps and coding schools, people outside the traditional CS space, and the biggest thing they told me was Microsoft needed better documentation. Biggest thing. And what we take away from these experiences, from this documentation, is people, developers specifically, are lifelong learners. 90% of us are partially self-taught, and 80% of us rely heavily on documentation. So given this information, as well as all these studies we did internally, in 2016, I was put to a challenge to figure out how we can improve all of Microsoft's developer documentation. And I want to share with you some of the new experiences we created. So, we set up a couple of goals. The first one was to have up-to-date documentation. So when I joined the .NET team back in 2016, if someone Googled C#, this is what they would get. It was Visual Studio .NET 2003. That's what they would get. And I cut off the embarrassing part, which said, this page is no longer maintained, right? I remember going to a startup to talk about .NET Core and how cool it was, and he sent me this screenshot and said, if Microsoft isn't willing to invest in their documentation, why should I be willing to invest in your stack? That hit my heart really, really hard. It was pretty harsh, I think. So before I jump to the next one, we noticed from this, we needed to rebrand our docs. We needed to improve our search optimization so we were not rendering all the old documentation. Big thing. The next thing was developers also had come to expect easy to navigate documents. I should be able to go to docs.microsoft.com/net and land on everything I can do with .NET. It is not the user's job to search for the documentation. It is our job to make the documentation easy to find. We also needed it to be quick with easy steps. We needed people to know how much time they would need to invest to get up and running. So on our marketing page for .NET, what we did was we told you that this would take you 10 minutes. And if it doesn't take you 10 minutes, complain, and we'll figure out what we need to do in the product to get it to 10 minutes. The last one was creating a friction-free experience. And this was the only thing that we needed to actually create a brand new experience. So if you've gone to docs.microsoft.com before or recently, most C# experiences will have an interactive experience. Have any of you seen this one before? Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, so if you look at this, you can write the code in the browser, edit it, and move forward. And we saw really good results. For every page that had the interactive C# experience, customer satisfaction went up by 20%. And this wasn't like the evil net promoter customer satisfaction. We actually thought about two things. Has a user hit run, and did they hit the smiley face? And that gave us a point of they enjoyed the experience. And we were very careful to make sure that the smiley face wasn't bright and yellow and looked like an emoji, but was grayed and outlined so that the user would have to notice it to hit the smiley face. We wanted to make it as authentic as possible. And that experience was powered by something that I built called Trident Net. So how many of you have heard of Trident Net? Okay, a few people. So Trident Net is an interactive documentation generator for .NET Core that enables both online and offline experiences. The goals for Trident Net was simple. We wanted to make sure that any online documentation was interactive that was .NET. And we wanted it not only for us at Microsoft, we wanted to create a service that was enabled for anyone who wanted to create similar experiences. The next one was incredibly important to me and was something I really had to fight for. It was a login-free experience. I wanted you to see this experience and not have to sign into anything. I didn't want you to have to create a Microsoft account in order to use this. I also didn't want people, the suggestion came up, what about if they signed up with GitHub? I was like, what if I'm a first-time developer and I don't know what GitHub is? People should just be able to use that. And the next one was fast on-ramp. I wanted to be gone with the days where if you wanted to write a Hello World application, or understanding strings, or string manipulation, I wanted those days to be gone that you had to install an editor or an IDE. I wanted users to install that when they were ready to build their first application. So, in 2017, we launched Trident Net Generation 1. The architecture was complex. We wanted that every single time the user went onto the page, it would load the Monaco editor, and when they hit run, we would send a request to the Trident Net service that would let you know that a container was ready, which was pre-figured for you using Azure Container Instances. So, super secure, because we wanted for people to be able to run arbitrary code without having to log in. Downside, I once got a bill of $30,000. Yes, and I remember being in vacation, I was home on the beach, and I got an email from my corporate vice president who was like, oh, you might want to think about cutting down this bill by 99%. Not 50, 99%. Not only was this expensive for us to run, but for someone who wanted to make sure that this tool was available to everyone, it just couldn't happen. We had Stack Overflow and other people come up to us and say, we want to use this service. We're like, okay, first you have to have an Azure subscription. Then you have to host this service and maintain it, and you should be good. And they're like, that's way too complicated just to run code. And then if individual users wanted to use it, like my boss was like, I want to use this on my blog. And I was like, you want to pay $30,000? And he was like, no. So we really had to think about the on-ramp. Even though we had thought about the on-ramp from the user hitting the website, we hadn't thought about the on-ramp of the people who might want to consume this. So we had to pretty much throw everything away 5 months ago and start to pivot. So when we pivoted Generation 2, we moved away from server-side execution using Azure Container Instances and pivoted towards client-side execution using Blazor. How many of you are familiar with Blazor? Yeah? Okay. So those of you who are not, Blazor runs on top of WebAssembly. So it allows us to compile C# on the client side, which means I cut the bill by 99%, right? Hopefully that gets me a promotion, right? But the cool thing is that even just by reducing the cost, we just also opened up so many scenarios. So our initial scenario was focusing on content authors online. We wanted to make sure that any online experience lit up, was specific to education. But then other experiences started to open up because we started to do user testing, which we should have done in the beginning. But as we started to do user testing, we started talking to more and more people in different demographics. So we talked to NuGet package owners, and they're like, have you seen this thing on MPN? We want that. We want to be able to offer that experience to our users. We went and we talked to educators and people who are running workshops. So someone who was running a workshop came up to me and said, I run probably 30 to 50 workshops a year at conferences. Biggest thing that I have in the time of 8 hours when I'm doing something with C# or .NET, it takes people about 3 hours to get all the tools up and running. Could you build something for me that would shorten the time? And I was like, oh, challenge accepted. So we thought about these people motivations, and I'm not going to read through them, but generally, for someone who has content online, they want to be able to provide interactive experiences so we don't have the static code samples, but we have more of the samples of where we encourage users to transition to a tool or an experience offline. And the motivation for people who read blogs, so we talked to a bunch of people who are avid blog fans who followed all these developers, and they say, big thing for us is I want to be able to run and edit the code in the browser. Another big thing for them was a lot of documentation, especially official documentation, was two-word heavy, and they would like to have some interactive experiences in there too. And for our package owners, the big thing for them was two. Being able to market their packages in an authentic way, and also being able to encourage open source contributions as well, because they felt by offering this experience, they would encourage more people to participate in it. And a big motivation for people who use packages every day was, I'm just sick of creating throwaway projects or installing this into my existing project. So they wanted to be able to create things really, really easily. And for educators, it was big for them to get their students over the first hurdle. How can we get people through the first hour or 2 hours of the workshop material without having them download the tools? Maybe they can be downloading the tools in the background, but how can we be successful? So we went away and we simplified and we created two things. .NET Try, a global tool, and the Trident Net JS API, which is going to be available to the public by the end of the summer. So I'm going to give you a quick demo of what this looks like. So I'm going to start with the workshop experience. Typically, how many of you go to workshops or attend workshops regularly? Okay. How many of you use GitHub repos with a backing project in the back end? Right? Okay, so this must look familiar when you have an overview of all the tools that people need to use, yeah? Pretty familiar. You roughly tell them it might be 30 minutes, you might be lying, but who cares? I wanted to simplify that process. So with a global tool, we claim, and you can go and test this later today if you don't believe me, that if you clone this project, install the .NET Core SDK, go to your terminal and install this global tool. All you have to go to the root directory, type .NET Try, and this will run a localhost experience. So I'm going to show you a demo. I already cloned everything and already installed the tool, but I can tell you it takes like 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes. So I already have the tool installed. I'm going to type .NET Try. This is going to start up Kestrel for me, start up the browser. It's all running locally on your machine using .NET Core, so everything's happening locally on the user's machine. And if you look at the top, you'll notice this is a readme.md. This is a markdown file. I'm going to go and click on the first experience. I'm going to hit run. Demos. It's always like how it runs. Okay, so, and it's running right within the host. So what we're doing here is that we're taking your browser and making it an editor, a very lightweight editor. So in your scenario of someone who's working, doing workshops, or creating content, you can actually mix your markdown with interactive code. I can edit this code, can run it again, I can go to the next one, and I have all these experiences. So the big question is, how am I doing this? How are we doing this on our side? So this is Markdown, like any other Markdown that you've used. But you will notice that in the code fence, where the triple tick is, we have a language identifier, which is C#. Then we have, using Try.net, we extended Markdown to do a couple of other things. We have a region option that points to a region. Let's do that. We have a source file that points to program.cs. And then we have a project option that points to your CS project that will have all the DLLs and requirements that you need to run this application. Now, if I head over to my program file, and I go over to methods, this is the methods region, and it's running the code right from here. So if I switch this around, and I did this, saved it, so it's still running. Let's refresh the page. Let's go over to methods. It's changed, and I can run the code. At build, that got applause, so I'll just clap for myself. But that wasn't enough, right? So in this experience, your backing project is a source of truth. So for anyone who has a workshop or material that exists in GitHub and you have a markdown file, all you need to do is add those options that I showed you and your regions, and you're good to go with the global tool. We're not asking you to add a framework, we're just asking you to add a global tool, which was part of what we wanted to do. Now, we didn't want people to only be bound to the backing project. Let's change it up a bit. Let me do this and do that. We also wanted people to be able to explore. So if I do .2, we get IntelliSense as well. I can run the code. So even though you have your backing project, your users can explore within the editor as well. We wanted that freedom for people to explore in peace. But if they will also have the code of truth still in the program file. So this won't affect what's happening in your program.cs. That was one thing that we wanted to achieve. The next thing we wanted to achieve was the ability to verify. So how many times do you create a project on GitHub with documentation and one of them falls out of sync? Like either the code snippets are off or the backing project is off. So we needed to catch that. So I'm going to do something, and I'm going to change this. Let's save that. And let's go over to our... When things are big, do you always find that you never find stuff? Like I'm just like, where is terminal? Let's see. I'll just go to this terminal. It's easier. So there we go. I'm going to type .NET try verify. So this is going in and checking your markdown to make sure that it's in sync with your backing project. So we've got an error. This is almost unit testing for documentation. To say, okay, .NET try has found one error. We scroll up, and there we have it. Methods was not found. So if I can go over there, I'm going to change this back, save it. Let's rerun the command. Okay. Let's see. Let me do that. Give me 1 second. Okay. That's embarrassing. Command prompt just froze on me. Maybe I shouldn't be using command prompt. Okay, so let's do this. There we go. Go to terminal, new terminal. Close that. Let's run .NET try verify. And everything will be fixed. Checking the marker. There we go. We get all green. But we're not only catching markdown errors, we're also catching compile errors too. So we can do that. Save it, rerun the command, and we should get a command. We should get a compile error, which is important, right? So it's important that everything is in sync. So the next big thing I always get is, can I take this markdown file and make it into a website? So here is This is something we created earlier. I'm not going to do it on the fly. But we can actually take your Markdown files and give you a bunch of HTML files that you can then go and publish to a cloud provider of your choice, maybe Azure, maybe something else. And this gives you the same experience. So you're able to run code. It takes a while to load. We're working on performance here. It's early days. Let's give it a bit. Okay, right. So you can run code just as we did offline. And now this experience is all running on Blazor. So if I go over to my developer tools, we can see WASM has been initialized. Go over to network. Let's refresh this page a couple of times. And you can see all the DLLs coming through. So this is 100% running on the client's machine. Now, there's one last thing that we're looking for feedback on, but it's very experimental. But just as we showed, NuGet.mpn having those interactive experiences, we're also creating the same experiences with NuGet. So being able to test all these experiences in the browser. If you like this experience, we're trying to get more people excited about it, please bug us on Twitter and bug us on our GitHub page, so our LT is forced to allow us to build this experience to empower all the NuGet people, right? So this is an experience we're running with. We're hoping to see how people respond to it, to see if it's something we should invest in. So, call to action, if you like what you see today, please go and see us. Check us out on github.com/.net/try. It's open source now. We have all our source code is out there for people to use. Currently, since we're a very small team, we are not accepting PRs from the public yet, but we are listening to all the issues and all the customer suggestions. And if you'd like to install the .NET Try Global tool, all you have to do is go to nuget.org. Oh yeah, I bought Nikes today, don't judge me. Nuget.org, look at .NET Try, and we're over there. Oh wow, that's literally gone up by 100 people since I last checked it. Okay, that's good, I'm very happy. I'm very happy. So try out the tool. We're looking for feedback. Our team is actively listening to people, and I have nothing else to share, but I'm hoping to get questions from you all. And I don't have gifts, I'm sorry. I didn't know I was supposed to be a present. Okay, so now we're open for questions. Thank you. Any questions, or I convinced you and you're sold? Okay, she has a question.
Do you have a lot of people that are educators that are using this now?
So right now, our primary, sorry. Okay, did anyone need me to repeat the question? Yes. Okay, do we have a lot of people who are educators who are using this currently? No, because it was only released 2 weeks ago. But we do have the whole of docs.microsoft.com. They're using this current experience. And we also have a professor, I believe, in the University of Birmingham who's exploring it right now. So people are exploring it. And I hope they use it and give us as much feedback to destroy us as much as possible. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, there's a question right there.
The person in front gets to ask first, sorry. Have you considered building a whole editor?
A whole editor?
Yeah, with Blazor. So you can make tutorials with a class, and where you have the whole editor to do tutorials.
Okay, so everyone had the question. So have we explored building a whole editor in the browser? So the truth is that did anyone watch Build this week? Okay, so Visual Studio Online is back. So we're actually taking Monaco and putting it in the browser. So I would encourage you to go and look at that experience. This is really focused on cell-like experiences, not like a full IDE. But that's not using Blazor. That's 100% Monaco and running containers in the back. They have really good, they have a really good blog post out on it on where they intend to go, and education is one of the scenarios. Yeah.
One down here.
So Maria, will it be possible to work with .NET Framework, or is it only going to be .NET Standard? Because obviously Umbraco's still on the framework for now.
So right now, like that question always makes me blush because I'm just like, Okay, so right now it's only .NET Standard, right? So you can only use .NET Core with this. So .NET Framework isn't out of the question, and we're hoping that with it being open source, that we'll get people in the community exploring this to see how it would work. So it's not never, it's more like we're looking for community support with this, because we're only 4 people. So that's the thing. But yeah, that question kind of breaks my heart, because I feel like we missed some people.
It was a cool demo, by the way. It all worked. Yeah. So at the beginning, you showed a sort of a learning bit in Azure, where you had the Azure shell up.
Yeah.
Is that the same underlying bits, or are these 2 separate things?
So the language services that they're using is, my part is Trident Net, but the Azure Cloud Shell is the editor. They don't use us as the editor. So Trident Net was designed to be purely headless. So you can switch it out for whatever you want.
Got it. Okay, so it wasn't what you have to look like Cloud Shell. That actually was Cloud Shell.
Yeah.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks.
Yeah. So that's another thing I want to be clear of. As we were beginning to use our user studies a lot, one of the things that people asked us to do was to make sure we enabled a headless experience where they could plug any sort of UI they wanted in front of it. So we're improving the try.net.js to allow people to do that. So if you want to plug this in front of CodeMirror, you can. If you want to use it in any way, you can. And we're improving that experience. Any other questions? Or I convinced you all. Who's going to try it out? Yay! I won. OK. That was caught on camera, so I'll get a promotion. We have, what, how many more minutes?
Well, that's up to you.
Oh, it's up to me? OK.
Yeah.
Oh, the power.
Okay, so I guess you know a little bit more about Blazor than me. As far as I know, it's not final yet, is it? Or is it like still in testing phase?
No, it's no longer experimental.
Okay.
It's in the product. The only thing is Blazor has there are 2 sides of Blazor. There's server-side Blazor and there's client-side Blazor. Mm-hmm. Server-side Blazor is in the market. It's in, I think, preview 1 now.
Okay.
That you can go and use, but it's no longer an experiment. People can go use it, and you can go and try and build your applications.
Okay,
Yeah.
But what about the client-side part?
The client side is still not, it's still experimental, and my team is running that experiment.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering about,
Yeah.
so, but, okay.
Yeah.
And do you happen to know when it will be released, like the final-ish version?
Ish version, around the same time or before of .NET 5, so I presume next year. I know, right?
Okay.
Yeah, but, yeah.
See. Okay, thanks.
I know. Like, I wish I could tell you by the end of the summer, but no, it's probably next year.
Thank you.
Any questions? No? Okay, thank you so much for coming.